Alex, hello. Thank you very much for inviting us to Jones today.
Yeah, there you are.
On a lovely day, the sun is shining, the sky is
good,
blue. So let's start. Can you just tell us, please, in a few words, who you are and what you do?
Of course. Well, first of all, welcome to Jones Day, as you said. I am a partner here at Jones Day, so I'm in the global disputes practice. So in plain English, that's really crisis management. That's everything from internal investigations, if someone blows the whistle because there's a problem internally, through to white-collar defence, through to asset recovery internationally. So that's what I do. But I'm a barrister by background, spent 16 years or so at the bar before I had a slight sabbatical in Parliament for 10 years or so, or 9 years.
Is that what they call it?
Well, that's what I used to say. I used to say when I was giving speeches that I was really a lawyer on a career break, and people laughed. They're not laughing now. Yeah, and I was always very conscious, actually, that that was a lawyer first and a politician second. That was important to me when I went into politics. I think you need to have some sort of hinterland, to add some value, but also so you've got something to go back to when, as I'm afraid is inevitable, the political grim reaper comes knocking.
So then starting at the beginning, just to rewind a little bit, the criminal bar, obviously a very different sort of experience to where we are now, for example, in Jones Day, but also in your parliamentary career. Just tell us a little bit about how you started off as a criminal barrister.
Yes. Well, look, metaphorically and physically, I've gone full circle because my chambers, 6 kbW, is literally a stone's throw away. Right. So it's just around the corner. So that's where I started before we actually moved out into the city and bought a building. But yes, so although it is completely different, I was doing a lot of prosecuting, everything from stuff in the Serious Fraud Office and the FCA through to terrorism, through to murder, manslaughter, and the gritty element of crime. But and then, of course, in politics, I was superintending the SFO and the CPS in my role as Solicitor General before I went on and became Lord Chancellor. But there's a bit of a circle that's metaphorical as well as a physical one, because if I'm getting involved in an internal investigation, it's not entirely dissimilar to some of the things that I observed when you have those investigators, whether it's SFO investigators or FCA investigators, bringing people in for questioning. So I've literally done interviews here at Jones Day. So of course it's different, but there are some crossovers. I confess that I miss a little bit of the advocacy, but there are a lot of completely different challenges. And for me, it was having come out of politics. If you wanted to have a gear change and try something different, if not now, when? So it really was an opportunity to have a change of scene, change of gear. And I gave it a go, although albeit not before having prosecuted a murder at the Old Bailey straight after leaving office, which I really enjoyed.
Oh, right.
Yeah, no, I did that. I finished that in January this year. It was a horrible case of a 17-year-old boy who stabbed to death a 15-year-old girl. So really, really grisly case. But then, as I say, I had a change of gear, change of scene, and I'm now here at Jones Day.
When you started at the bar then, did you have a plan to go into politics later, or did you, because actually, the bar is, I know from personal experience, it's not a kind of career to toy with. You've got to be all in, given the demands, but both going in and whilst you're working. Did you think, actually, I'd like to be a politician?
Yeah, so I met a couple of barristers in Parliament for whom it was perfectly clear that the bar was a stopgap, was just a diversion before they wanted to go into. That was never the case.
Lots
for me.
of examples of that.
Yeah,
actually,
that was never the case for me. So I've always been interested in politics, which for me was about an interest in the fortunes of my community and my country. Right. So for me, politics was like, if you saw that us going up the education league tables, being really excited about it. If you saw us heading down, feeling rather grim about it and wanting to try to have play your poor part in putting yourself amongst the problems of our country and improving them. So that was the instinct for me. But that instinct sat alongside a real, genuine, deep-seated interest in the law. And by the way, there are things that are common to both. The idea of advocating on behalf of a client or advocating on behalf of a community, and then subsequently on behalf of your country, which you do if you serve at that level, it's not a million miles away. You've got to marshal the arguments, you've got to make your best points, as I did at the G7. You're sitting there, you've got your brief. What are the things most in our favour? What are the problems we've got to deal with? What's France going to say to us about this? What's the best rebuttal? I mean, there are some parallels. So for me, I was never playing at the law. I really loved it, and that's why I did say with some sincerity that I was a lawyer on a career break.
There are, as we've just been discussing, there are lots of politicians who have a legal background of some kind, some who sort of dabbled. Do lawyers make, there are lots of them, but do lawyers make good politicians?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely 30 years ago, there's an argument about whether they still do. I say that because 30 years ago, the paradigm of being an MP was you would go and you would have a vigorous debate, and part of being a debater is you don't have to be William Pitt or Charles James Fox to know that it's about marshalling the argument and being a parliamentarian, etc., etc. Yeah. The reason why I have some hesitation about whether it's as relevant now is because so much of being a politician is actually a kind of retail thing. In other words, it's about the metrics of a good politician are much less now about can he or she make a great speech in the chamber. It's about can he or she make a great clip for Facebook, which is where, of course, more people get their news than anything else, notwithstanding Instagram and TikTok and goodness knows what. So that's an important thing. Who can write great literature and leaflets, which then get shoved through people's doors? It's a much more retail world than perhaps the more quasi-professional role than it was even just 30 years ago, which was closer. And let me give you one very, very brief example. So I remember standing up in one of my first all parliamentary questions for education. I had a question, a burning question that I wanted to ask, which was relevant to my constituents. Imagine my frustration when someone popped up before me, higher up in the queue, and asked the very questions I wanted to ask. Now, as a lawyer, my legal mindset was, oh, for goodness sake, I'm not going to ask the question. That's been answered. We've got an answer. So when it came round, and it was Speaker Burko in the chair, he said, Alex, chalk. And I said, no need to ask a question, Mr. Speaker, it's been answered. And he couldn't believe it. He said, what? What's going on? Is a member of parliament who is passing up the opportunity to repeat something for an entirely performative purpose.
Yeah.
But that is the issue, So actually, the only concern is lawyers might be a bit lawyerly nowadays, and that was one of the criticisms that was made of Keir Starmer, certainly initially, before arguably he got the hang of it. Query whether he has, but he was just boring because he would make speeches at the dispatch box if he was in the Court of Appeal, and the two don't necessarily carry over in the way that they once might have done.
It's a slight diversion, but they talk about the sort of performative aspect, which of course has been criticised over the years. That Houses of Parliament, that the House of Commons, it has this performative aspect rather than dealing with the issues. And is there some truth in that? Actually, is there an argument to say people should be more like the kind of lawyerly instincts that you had, which is let's just get on with business and move things along, and not. Let's use this opportunity to have the performative.
Ultimately, the judge of that are the people. Yeah. But I can say this now because I'm not in politics. The people are quite fickle because on the one hand, the people will say, for goodness sake, all this braying and shouting, it's a nonsense. You're letting us down. Why don't you have a civilized debate? Deal with the problems of our country. Fine. But then if they watch a civilized, boring discussion about dealing with the problems of their country, very often they go, oh, this is completely boring. Why can't you show a bit of passion? Why can't you show a bit of fight? Why can't you get your point across? And so, look, I think that the truth of it is the most successful politicians have been able to do both. So if you think of someone like Tony Blair, this is a guy who could give it full beans and make David Cameron as well, really powerful, persuasive, passionate speech, but also was capable of that forensic analysis. Tony Blair, of course, a barrister. So
although always seemed to be, from that point of view, in the shadow of his wife.
Well, I don't know, but I think his wife probably not been such a great politician. Anyway, I'm probably getting a bit off point. But I think that anyway, the bottom line is lawyers can make good politicians so long as they remember not to be too loyally.
Yeah. So you had your career as a criminal barrister, and then how did the move into politics come about? I think you mentioned that you had a few discussions with people.
So I was always interested. It came about very simply because my seat, Cheltenham, hometown, came up, and I remember I was actually visiting my sister, who was at the time living in Tanzania, and It was great, and then it came up, and I filled out the application, sent it off, and then blow me down with a feather, I ended up getting selected. And I remember having to call my wife and say, sweetheart, turns out I'm the prospective parliamentary candidate for Cheltenham, and her answer was, "Where's Cheltenham?" so that was, and I was like, but I wasn't expected to win. The bookies had me down to lose, and so I thought it was going to be the longest fool's errand in history. But then in 2015, there was a big shift, and ultimately I was elected. And actually, for me, it was very important to represent my home patch. That gives you that extra fire in your belly. This is a community that you are from, and I always knew I wanted to serve. And candidly, I would have served whoever I was elected for to the best of my ability. But there is a real visceral connection when it's your community, the streets that you've grown up in, and a lot of the people who, in Cheltenham's case, still live there. People hang around, so it's great.
And was that against the putting the application in? That's against the background though of presumably building a name and building a bit of a reputation that allows you to then make that application and to be seen, right? So that's who we want to be standing.
Well, not really. I mean, I think my probably strongest credential was that I was a local boy. And I think they took the view that I was a local boy who was prepared to fight quite hard. Although, the real difficulty for me was I was also building a moderately successful legal practice, and trying to balance campaigning and doing that became extremely difficult. And actually, well, this is probably not the time to go into any details.
Career at the bar with a tech startup. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, exactly. Quite how you do it, I don't know. But it is extremely difficult. Anyway, it was actually quite brutal at times. But nothing worth doing is easy. Nothing worth doing is easy, and that was certainly an example of that.
And then, so you were elected, sort of fantastic. You then had quite a sort of meteoric rise, really, through the ranks in terms of time and things like that. How did that come about?
Well, actually, it wasn't that meteoric. So if the graph would have been, and by the way, I should just be clear, I don't measure my kind of achievements in politics by office held. I measure my achievements in politics like what I delivered for my constituents. I mean, I got a new school, we got a cyber park, we got a new road scheme, we got 50,000 other playhouse, stuff like that was really important. New homeless shelter, that's the stuff that was really important to me. But and in fact that is relevant to the point I'm about to make about my career, because in fact the graph of my office went sort of flat, and then woof, like that. So as opposed to it being a natural grade, and that's because I made very clear that I didn't want to be promoted for at least 5 years, because I wanted to earn the tacit permission of my constituents to serve as a minister. I wanted to be able to show to them that I had served and I'd worked hard and I'd done my bit, so that they could say, right, this isn't just some geezer who's using us as a springboard for his vainglorious ego trip, but he's somebody who believes ultimately that the source of his authority comes from the democratic mandate of the people, and he takes that seriously. And I hope I earned that respect. So anyway, so I didn't actually, apart from PPS roles, which is, kind of parliamentary bag carrier thing, which I did in various departments, it wasn't until 2019 that I was then appointed in the MOJ, and then went to become Solicitor General, and then Minister for Defence Procurement, and then ultimately Lord Chancellor. But the ministerial career was actually compressed very much within the second half of my time in Parliament. The first half, I was on the backbenches and very happy to be there.
Can I ask you then a little bit about being Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice, and the time that you were there and what you managed to achieve? So looking back at that period, what are the things that you would say, I'm so pleased and proud to have achieved those things?
Well, I mean, when you become a Secretary of State, you have a certain amount of political capital, and in simple terms, that means you've got goodwill behind you, and you can spend that goodwill. Now, I decided to burn through quite a lot of my political capital very early on, doing things like saying, I want the Chancellor of the Exchequer to reopen the spending review, very difficult thing to do, to give me in the MOJ an additional 80 million quid, which I wanted to then spend on the fabric of the court system. The buildings which were falling apart. I'm not suggesting
still are.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not suggesting the system is fixed by any means, but that £80 million meant that we could plan some really important renovations, as opposed to this ridiculous feast and famine, or frankly, going from day to day, year to year, which is impossible to plan, and it just becomes a patch and mend thing. But actually have to plan. So look, it might sound like a small issue, but it was incredibly important. A, for the practicalities, which are obvious, but B, because of the message it sent about the esteem with which we held the court system. So that was really important to me. Other things that were massively important were, representing us abroad and trying to open up other markets, which I sought to do in India and elsewhere, trying to get increasing legal aid. So we put an additional £155 million into legal aid. We kept a lot of the Nightingale courts open, recruited 1,000 judges. So those things were important, and did a huge amount in terms of violence against women. Domestic abuse bill was something that I took through, which I was really proud of. So look, I mean, there are lots of things I can point to. One slightly frivolous example is I did go back to Thomas Bingham's book, The Rule of Law, great little thin, fantastic, right? And there was this bit which had struck me yonks ago in the introduction, which said that the Ministry of Justice should move away in its branding from the vapid slogans of, kind of justice for all, this kind of nonsense, serving justice, which sort of meaningless, and should actually look to put on its walls some of the important aphorisms that are derived from what is probably the proudest history of development of the rule of law anywhere in the world. So if you now walk past Petit France building, you will see on the decals on the window, no free man shall be seized or imprisoned or stripped of his rights or possessions or outlawed or exiled. Neither will we proceed against him by force except by the lawful judgment of his peers or the law of the land, which is, Rule 39 or Part 39 of Magna Carta. There's be never so high, the law is above you, Richard Fuller. There is stuff from the Petition of Right, from the Bill of Rights, charting the rule of law and the history of the rule of law in this country. And that's a quiet tribute to probably our greatest ever lawyer, Tom Bingham. So that's a small little legacy for you on the building itself.
That sort of suggests to me that when you take up this office, you feel a sort of weight of history, sort of that there is. You look to the past and what's been achieved, and feel an obligation or a link. And is it more than that? What does that mean? And is it intimidating when you take?
No. So I felt a link with the history. So there is a continuity. I think that's point one. Point two, there is also an understanding of the need to evolve. So when I was particularly looking at international law, I was very clear, and I said this with my international counterparts, we can't treat it as some kind of ossified relic. Whether you're talking about the ECHR or the ICCPR or the Refugee Convention or any of these things, they've got to evolve and adapt, and because otherwise they'll all be discarded, and I think we'll move into a more dangerous world. So anyway, the point is that link with history was also a link with the recognition that, as a state without the means of some change is also without the means of its conservation. So, which is a classic Edmund Burke conservative principle. Actually, it's a recalibrating at every opportunity. So that was part of the link. The other thing I wanted to make is that we have such a poor understanding in Britain in terms of kind of as part of our general cultural awareness of the extent to which this country has led. We have such a strong rule of law tradition. We've contributed so much to the world, and I sometimes think that we just either don't know about it, or don't care about it, or ashamed about it, or defensive about it. I don't know. We should be much proud. We should be much proud of it. And we have the second largest legal sector in the world. When do people talk about that? And I wasn't sure that was something that was even understood in cabinet. And so I want to, not in a kind of jingoistic land of hope and glory kind of way, but I think we should take more than a little pride in what we have achieved in this country and the jurisprudence that's come out of it. And in a small way, if you can stick it on the front of the building, that's just part and parcel of sort of soft education message.
Should we be doing more about the use of English law around the world? For example, the quality of the judiciary, the reliability of the system, the rule of law that's been built up over a number of years. All of that contributes to English law being adopted in clauses all over the world, for which, of course, UK PLC doesn't earn a penny. Should we be doing more, not only to be sort of talking about it, be proud about it, but more to necessarily monetize, but more to be using the fact that harness it, that we've got that sort of reach?
Listen, I think it's two things. One, it's simply to consolidate our extraordinary reputation, which of course attracts litigants around the world. And it is worth reflecting. I mean, this is not just us hanging on to faded past glories. It's not. This is something which is very real, very cogent, very current in terms of our excellence, and it's getting stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
So that is like point one.
Well, look at English judges being exported around the world.
They are, honestly, they really are exceptionally good. I did this, as I said, this murder case, debated in front of a High Court judge, and the quality of the rulings, I just thought, wow, I'm very, very proud of that. That's in my country. So I think it's really, really great. So part of it is just carry on, folks. You're doing great, just whatever. And that's fine. But in terms of harnessing it, look, one of the things I want to do in government, funny enough, when I was SG, is try to assist those of our judges who, for some reason, still have time, I don't know where they get it from, to go around the world and start helping other jurisdictions or whatever, to assist them in doing that. It is massively significant for soft power, for our influence around the world. So look, beyond that, I don't think you can harness it specifically. But the only thing I would just push back on in terms of what you said is, it's just a sense that we can't monetize it. It is being monetized anyway. I mean, we have this massive legal sector. It's critical. And the final point is, it's not just about pounds, shillings and pence, important though that is. It's important providing a ladder of opportunity for kids who might not have had the easiest start in life, but are smart, prepared to work hard. In this building or in your chambers or wherever it is, these are life-changing opportunities. Yes, of course, you're going to have to be smart. That's fine. But, you can't help everyone. But wow, what a thing to have in this country. What a sector to have. So we should be nurturing that.
Yeah. You mentioned the judges. As Lord Chancellor, what's the relationship between Lord Chancellor and the judges at that level? Whether that's with the Supreme Court or with Sir Geoffrey Voss, and how did you manage that when you were Lord Chancellor?
So there is an incredibly important relationship between the LC and the LCJ, and that's built around various things that you have to deal with, including judicial discipline. But there's also a big constitutional issue. And I'll give you one example. One of the things I had to deal with, which I'm probably most proud of, is this business about the post office. So remember Bates and the post office, and over 900 people have been convicted. So here's the exam question. What do you do if you're LCJ, or forgive me, if you're the Lord Chancellor, and you know that there are 900 plus people who at the moment have the mark of Cain hanging over them? Some people have gone to their grave as convicted people, where of course, that they are entirely innocent. Should you, as some might suggest to the purists in the legal sense, go through the Court of Appeal system, do it one by one, but that could take a long, long time. And it might not, maybe people can say, oh, don't worry, we'll deal with it all in 2 weeks or whatever, but you sit there and go, I wonder. Or do you cut across that and have some kind of parliamentary exoneration, which is ultimately the route we go down? I wrestled with that, and I wrestled with the issue of separation of powers. Were we going to set a precedent? Were we cutting across the independence of the judiciary, etc.? So these are really, really difficult judgment calls, and inevitably it requires you to engage with the judiciary. Now, I think between us we worked through it and we hammered it out, and it was fine. But those are the sorts of constitutional issues that come that come up.
Are we going to see more of that? I mean, we're going to move on to LegalTech in a second. It's very interesting. Are we going to see more of that interaction between government and the courts, particularly bearing in mind what's going on across the pond? Are we going to? Does that get a greater degree of focus here as a result of some of the real tensions that are happening in the
Well,
US?
that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, look, let's just be completely candid about this. Every time a court imposes an order, it is an exercise in collective faith. That judge has no army, no private army to enforce that. And of course, there are agencies who can give effect to it. But it's because we have a long and deep-seated tradition of respecting the courts, respecting the order of the court, which is a cultural thing, which is imbued through generations, etc., etc. Now, if there is a normalization, whether because of what happens in the UK or indeed imported from elsewhere, then actually court orders are really, who cares? What really matters is the power of the executive and so on. Then I think that's extremely dangerous and regrettable. The one massive thing we've got in our favor in this country is that we don't have elected judges. So if you're in the United States, you sit there and go, hang on, this is a contest between one elected guy, i.e. the president or whoever, and another, some elected or at least appointed by a political process. Well, look, between the two, I'm saying that the guy I voted for in the presidential election has more currency. Whereas here, we don't have that.
No.
We don't have elected DAs and so on.
And it feels so alien, I think, to us.
It feels
to
alien.
think of the concept of elected.
So listen, in politics, you have to work out what your red lines are. Okay, so and bluntly, you cannot be somebody who sort of holds your nose or starts sort of clutching your pearls and resigning over every small thing. But the one thing that is really, really important, the ditch to die in, is elected judges. We don't want to go there. We don't want to go there, because I think it becomes extremely difficult to say, potentially, well, why should we accept that order of that elected person over there rather than the guy who's been elected on a much, much bigger mandate more recently, and who, by the way, I actually think I agree with. So I don't want to go down that road.
No. So we do need to talk about LegalTech. You have recently joined the advisory board of pinqDR, which we are absolutely delighted with. What was behind your thought process with that? What resonated with you about pinqDR and online dispute resolution and what we're doing that led you to?
Yeah. Well, look, I was very, very happy to do that. I was interested from the word go, because for a number of reasons. I think reason number one is this is an idea whose time has come, in the sense that if you want to improve something which has always been my kind of driving force, access to justice, etc., this is a brilliant way of doing so. Applying technology, which is something I tried to do in office when I was a junior minister in the MOJ, to allow people who might otherwise not be able to get their disputes remedied or their rights vindicated in a more efficient and effective way. I'm a little bored of hearing justice delayed is justice denied, as the most sort of tedious legal cliche, but there is a lot of truth in it. So reducing those barriers using tech is absolutely critically important. So that was the first and perhaps the most important thing. The second thing is this is a British tech legal startup. UK law tech is over 40% of all European law tech startups. So we have huge strength in this country, and I just love the idea of a UK organisation leading the charge on this. And apropos of the points I was making before about our influence, yes, it is in part the sheer acumen of our judges and our practitioners, but we have got to ensure that we are at the leading edge of technology as well. Because when I was prosecuting this murder at the Bailey, there was some intern from Singapore who was coming and watching the whole thing. And I think there were some things that he was hugely impressed by, including, by the way, the caliber of our judges. I think some of our tech probably wasn't quite where he thought it should be. And I think there were some reasonable observations there. So if we can use technology to increase people's access to justice and to speed things up and to do things at a lower cost, that is exactly the place we should be in. And also the third point is there were a lot of supporters as well who I happen to significantly respect, and that gave me a lot of comfort too.
How receptive do you think the sort of state apparatus in the legal sense and the courts are to some of this technology? There's lots of legal tech developments happening in the private sector, perhaps quite a lot less in the sort of state side and the courts. How receptive are they? And also perhaps what's the way to, if they're not, to increase that kind of receptiveness?
Okay, so certainly when I was a minister, we had money for innovation. So we did they call them sandbox funds. So yeah, we did put quite a lot of money into that, and that's something that I was extremely keen on. It will never match funds from the private sector, but there was a significant amount of money that went in. Now, should we do more of that? Unquestionably. Can we afford to do more of that? I don't know. I mean, certainly if I were in the MOJ, this is something that I would prioritise. I mean, let me just give you just a very small example. In the white heat of COVID, I decided to take, it was only £500,000, which in the grand scheme of a £14 billion budget is modest, to give to a tech company that was ensuring that if women were the victims of domestic abuse sitting in their homes, which they couldn't leave, that when they're in the bathroom where they were hiding away from their tormentor, that they could use tech to effectively write down what had happened to them contemporaneously. That via tech would be converted into a statement. That could then also be, she could be piped through to an available legal aid practitioner. Yep. You could get all the documents for some injunctive relief, or whatever it is, done within seconds, and you're in court and sorted out. So that was modest sums of money, which we put in that genuinely protected people. And the reality is, if we are going to maintain our credentials as a leading G7 trading nation, the ability of people to vindicate their rights is going to be incredibly important. Although it's a totally different sphere from domestic abuse, obviously, it is absolutely essential. And I do feel that unless we upgrade and recalibrate and take advantage of technology, we might be, if not left behind, I just don't think we'll be making the most of our excellence. Final thing to say is as Secretary of State, as Lord Chancellor, I was at the launch of the Online Procedure Rules Committee, for example, with Geoffrey Voss, and I made a point of doing so, even though I think plenty of Lord Chancellors might have said, well, I'm not sure I really need to be there for that. I made a point of being there because I wanted to show this was a real priority for me. So the straight answer to your question, should we be doing more of it? Yes. Will we? That's a matter of priorities. Politics is about making tough choices.
Yeah. So then, final question, you've, at least for now, left politics sort of behind you. You're now at Jones Day. What sort of thing are you currently focusing on at Jones Day?
Okay, so I'm doing a lot of internal investigation work. I'm doing, just by way of example, two cases. One involving where somebody's walked off with secrets, allegedly, in respect of a warship. That's one kind of case. Another one where there's a suggestion that the wrong amount of tax has been paid in respect of landfill. So these are sort of internal investigations.
The warship.
You like the warship one?
Than the,
yes, the more than waste disposal. So that's great. And then international asset recovery work as well. And I'm about to jump on a plane tomorrow to go and speak to GE Aerospace about ECTA, the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, which of course is the failure to prevent fraud offence, which you'll know about, which is taking effect on the 1st of September, and what big corporates can do to avoid falling foul of that.
I feel like your workload has not reduced.
It hasn't. It hasn't. It hasn't reduced, but it's just different work, and I always want to be doing something that is interesting and worthwhile.
Yeah. Alex, that's been brilliant. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Fantastic to talk to you.